Welcome, witches. Okay, I'll be the first to admit, the movies on the last tier were kind of a lot. But I'm actually kind of excited to talk about some of the movies today, and I actually did end up watching more of them than I expected. Still not all of them. In fact, in the entire 5th tier, there's only one that I did watch. But you know, tier 6, my record was a little better. I did technically watch 4 of them, but I did watch one whole complete episode of one of them, which was a TV series, so I think that should count. Okay, we're calm, we're feeling good, we've got Merlin here for strength, and Tommy here too, apparently. Let's get into the movies. Tier 5. Now, there are going to be 2 types of movies on this tier for the most part. We've got some pseudo-snuff films in the similar vein to August Underground, but then we're also going to be talking about a couple of movies that are, they're adult films, guys. Let's just get that out of the way now. I do not have any formal training critiquing this type of material. As you guys may have already guessed, my strengths lie more in the realm of horror and terror, and I have a bit of a background in, like, folklore, I guess, which is really vague. This is why they kicked me out of the academy. But anyway, my point is that fairy tales will not save me today, but at least I can return to my old reliable horror and terror. But that being said, like, please don't make fun of how weird I'm gonna be, because, like, this is just weird, you guys. I do love critiquing across different mediums. I've tried to learn a little bit about the history of, like, film and literature and cartoons and comic books, but, I have to admit that this is one place that I have overlooked, but let's still give it a try. Women's Flesh, My Red Guts. This is a 40-minute short movie that consists of setup and payoff, and that's it. A woman is left by her husband, and so she begins mutilating and cannibalizing herself in an expression of grief. Do not try this at home, kids. It's a good example of body horror and a creative use of special effects. But otherwise, it isn't so much of a deep exploration on the subject of grief, and more of an excuse to exploit the gore of the situation. And on top of that, I do tend to have a problem with especially extreme depictions of self-harm in movies. You know, personally, I think it's less about the body horror or the gore and more about the psychological horror of imagining the amount of grief that it must take to get to that place. And on top of that, I think that the experience of thinking yourself less valuable because of the way that someone has treated you is very relatable to many people. And that just isn't a feeling that many people want to revisit in a movie format unless we're gonna get a big redemption arc where she learns to accept her value somehow. Which I have to admit, I don't really see how she's gonna do now that she's, you know, pulled out her own intestines and eaten them. Yeah, this video is gonna get messed, you guys. Oster montag. So this is the film debut of Heiko Fipper. That just sounds unnatural to say. Heiko Fipper. Heiko Fipper. And the way that most people describe it is sort of like German August Underground. As in, it's supposed to come across as the home movies of a serial killer who enjoys torturing his victims. But I hear that the special effects are just terrible. I fully admit that this is one of the movies that I refused to watch after reading about it, by the way. And the main reason for that was the alternative title for the movie. I spit on your fucking grave, bitch. I'm gonna go on a little tangent here, but I think we need to talk about that. I Spit on Your Grave is a 1978 revenge flick. It has an extremely controversial reputation nowadays, because although the plot of the movie does follow a young woman getting bloody revenge for her itself is just shown in such graphic detail. It lasts about 1/3 of the movie's runtime, and is honestly the reason why I can't sit through any exploitative scene in a movie anymore. I will now close my eyes because the way that it's represented in this movie is just so traumatizing. The director of I Spit on Your Grave, Mai-chan, argued that the scene needed to be that graphic though, because the subject of can't be treated lightly. In his mind, to just sort of glance over that scene and not deal with the harsh realities of it would be a disservice. But at the same time, you do sort of have to ask yourself where the line is, you know? How far is too far? When does it come from respecting the truth of the victim to exploiting their suffering? All of this will come back to Oster montag in a second, I promise. I Spit on Your Grave actually was not chosen by Mai-chan for the title. That was entirely a marketing decision, and a seemingly good one at that, that because nobody really cared about this movie until it had that good punchy punk title. The original title of the movie was supposed to be Day of the Woman. Think about the different marketing that you get when you market a movie as Day of the Woman as opposed to I Spit on Your Grave. Like, which sounds like more of a horror movie, honestly. But the important thing to note is who the title is supposed to be from the perspective of. There is a lot of violence in I Spit on Your Grave, sure, but the only people who actually die are the so I guess it can be assumed that the person who's doing the spitting is the survivor. It's actually a pretty strong statement on the value that should have in our society, which is to say, none at all. Like, it's not only saying that if you commit these crimes, then you sort of deserve a violent death, it's also saying that you deserve continued disrespect long after your death. But I spit on your fucking grave, bitch just has to add that feminized slur at the end. And on top of that, the only people who die in Oster montag are the victims, who are all women. So basically what I'm saying is that this movie got on my bad side from the title alone. It took a statement that was controversial and brutal, but generally sympathetic towards the victims, and it instead changed it into a hateful statement about how being a woman earns you a violent death and continued disrespect long afterwards. Yeah, fuck you. Girl Hell 1999. So yeah, let's just say that it's a good thing that I already brought up I Spit on Your Grave, because it seemed to have inspired a lot of movies on this tier, like this one. Except it's worse. So the movie follows a young woman who lives with her horrendously abusive family, up until the day that she meets basically the teenagers from A Clockwork Orange. And after all the and the torture and, you know, all that fun stuff, she decides to get revenge. I will admit that it is kind of interesting because a lot of these older revenge movies play out as though the revenge was all the survivor really needed. Like, yeah, she's traumatized, but all she needed to do was cut off some and she'll feel better in the morning. At least Girl Hell 1999 acknowledges the reality that revenge is most likely senseless, and that they'll continue to live with this trauma for the rest of their life. But at the same time, there are a lot of revenge movies that deal with that theme a lot better. Like the other day, I watched the movie The Perfection on Netflix, and wow, was that a fascinating retake on the entire genre. I cannot recommend that one highly enough. Girl Hell 1999, not so much. Mai-chan's Daily Life, the movie. So this is in reference to a live-action movie based on an extremely fucked up manga. Basically, Mai-chan is the live-in maid to this extremely sadistic couple who discover that she has regenerative abilities. So they basically just get off on her total submission while they torture and cannibalize her. This movie is, yeah, this is one of those adult films I was talking about, and this is just where the movie, like, really loses me, you know? I am a fan of horror movies that deal with the brutality of the upper class, and this whole concept of torturing a live-in servant has been successfully presented in media. Like, look at any movie that chooses to tackle the life story of Elizabeth Bathory. So I think that if this had gone the route of demonizing the brutality, then there could have been something interesting here. But then this movie wouldn't have held the appeal that it does for some, which is, you know, gore, which just isn't my thing. Eccentric Psycho Cinema. Yay, more gore. Eccentric Psycho Cinema is essentially 7 movies, all of them with more or less the same premise. We just get to watch some businessman pick up girls, take them back to his apartment, torture them, before ultimately cutting off their private bits, showing it to them, and then placing it in a glass jar. There is a lot of sexual torture, including one movie where he apparently tries to place a lizard inside someone's private bits. But I've also read that the movies are poorly edited, poorly acted, and that the gore isn't super convincing, so even if this is your thing, apparently it's not super your thing. I don't know, I was listening to Mary Harron talk about American Psycho the other day, and she was talking about how oftentimes dating does present this potential horror story for women. Like, you go back to the guy's apartment and you sort of think to yourself like, oh, I hope this one isn't a serial killer, but you play it off as a joke, but there is sort of a genuine fear there. She talked a lot about how she tapped into this genuine fear when she was writing American Psycho, and I really don't know why I bring that up now, except American Psycho is a much better movie than this. Go watch American Psycho. Tumbling Doll of Flesh. Can my breakdown for this movie just be a simple declaration of hate? No? Okay. So Tumbling Doll of Flesh is an adult film, basically. Our adult film stars start the show, but then the female performer starts to get uncomfortable with how rough everything is getting. So they knock her out, tie her to the bed, and proceed to sexually torture her. I cannot stress enough how graphic this one gets too. Like, this one is legitimately for people who enjoy torture. The Necrophiles. Hey look, it's the one movie on the tier that I did watch! The plot is simultaneously simple and absolutely insane. It's about a serial killer who gets killed by the cops and then ultimately resurrected by a satanic cult. At which point he becomes a zombie that just goes around women. Not gonna lie, the scenes are pretty graphic and hard to watch and I hate them. But then you get to these scenes of the flying zombie baby and it's just like... Thank you, Necrophiles. This is exactly what I needed to see today. As you can probably tell from the scenes that I'm showing here, this isn't a particularly good movie, but if you just so happen to be a fan of both House of a Thousand Corpses and The Amazing Bulk,
what the hell is that?
Well, it ain't Barney the Purple Dinosaur!
Then have I got a movie for you. The Gateway Meat. The Gateway Meat is sort of in the same vein as August Underground in that they're both pseudo-snuff films that are supposed to be mistaken as the home videos of a serial killer. But this one has the additional premise of our serial killer being a Satanist who is going around killing people in the hopes of opening the gates of hell. Which does kind of sound like a cool addition because, you know, at least we could throw in some cool demonic imagery. But nah, even the way that it's shot is just so unappealing that it wastes its entire concept and just sort of reveals itself for what it is. An edgelord's home movies as he plays with special effects with his friends. The other way that it tries to be shocking is by throwing in clips of the killer's daughter as she's apparently witnessing all of the torture and mayhem and stuff. The generational nature of, I guess, abuse or maybe extremist beliefs is a huge theme here. Simply because we get to see how the protagonist's father attempted to open the gates of hell before him and ultimately failed. And now our protagonist is teaching his daughter how to be the perfect little murderess. In my opinion, it isn't a particularly compelling or believable depiction of how one gets involved in these types of beliefs. Like, yeah, I'm sure that there are people out there who were raised in cults that taught them an inappropriate understanding of what's acceptable in society. But in recent years, I think that we've seen that it's more common, and hell, even more terrifying, to watch normal people get radicalized by harmful communities, simply because they feel outcasted by society already, and these communities provide them with a sense of belonging. Personally, I think that this would have been a more interesting approach than having him and his daughter just kind of born into this cult. But also, while we're on the subject, most Satanists are not evil, and in fact most Satanists don't even believe in a Christian devil. I am not a Satanist myself, but let's at least get our facts straight, people. The Taming of Rebecca. Sorry in advance to any Rebecca's watching right now. You definitely deserve better than to have this as a piece of media with your name attached to it. Like, yeah, I find it annoying when people sin 1-2 step at me, but I didn't realize how much worse I could have it. But, anyway, this is about a girl who escapes from her abusive father to join a boarding school where they sexually torture her. I'd leave it there, but I might also mention that this movie has sort of the reputation that it does because it was found in the VCR of serial killer Stephen Pennell when he was arrested. Specifically on a scene where Rebecca gets her nipple pierced. So yeah, this is another movie made for the pinhead crowd, I guess.
We have such sights to show you.
6th tier! I'm gonna be honest, this is the tier that I was most excited to reach when I started this Iceberg. I find myself very drawn to wanting to learn more about the parts of day-to-day life that we don't like to contend with, you know, like death and war and, you know, awful stuff like that. These are the sort of topics taken up by Mondo films, which was a type of documentary that was especially popular in the 1960s. The problem with many Mondo films is that they might include scripted or otherwise sensationalized material to further exploit the topic. I had watched a handful of Mondo films before coming to this Iceberg, including a couple of movies that are actually on this tier. To be honest, I sort of think of them as a good example of a movie that you can definitely learn something from, but you really need to put on your critical thinking brain in order to not get caught up in all of the exploitation. You know, you need to separate fact from reality a little bit. And an unfortunate reality about a lot of these topics is that they are frightening. And some filmmakers might try to use that fright to their advantage footage to get a cheap thrill out of their audience. Not gonna lie, I do think I'm being a little bit too vague right now, but let's just jump right into the tier with some examples. Faces of Death. So we're starting with one that I'm actually fairly familiar with, and that is the 1978 documentary Faces of Death, which is entirely about the subject of death. We're given the framing device of this creepy doctor that narrates everything we're seeing, and beginning to end, we just watch people and animals being killed. It's been estimated that about 40% of the deaths in this movie are staged, with Alan Apone serving as the special effects artist. But that does mean that 60% of it is real. Most of these are the animal deaths. We get to see things like dogfighting and animals hunting in the wild. But we also get to see some human deaths, mostly through vehicular accidents. If you grew up on YouTube, you may have already stumbled upon similar content just clicking randomly on videos at 3 a.m. Like when I was about 15, I stumbled upon the video of Bud Dwyer's death while I was on YouTube, and I was like, oh, it's on YouTube, how bad can it be? And was immediately traumatized. So if anything similar to that has ever happened to you, you've already been through the shock of this movie. Apparently that's a trend that's moved on to TikTok now from what I hear. I think it's apt to bring up these types of internet videos because I think that people were seeking this movie out back when it first came out for a similar reason that people seek out these videos now. You know, there's a certain morbid curiosity. You hear about death every day and you know it's gonna touch you eventually, but you never do see it, so it's natural to want to remove that defamiliarity. That being said, I do think that Faces of Death is extremely irresponsible in the way that it goes about fostering that curiosity. It is a fear-based documentary, and its entire purpose is to shock and dismay you, which has apparently resulted in some people accusing this movie of giving them an irrational fear of death, and I don't really doubt it. In my opinion, death kind of in general should be approached as a more neutral topic. Like, obviously, if someone is horrendously murdered before their time, then that's clearly a tragedy. But I do think that there's something sort of harmful in acting as though all death is immediately a tragedy, when the truth is that death is just natural. You know, it's gonna happen to us all. We all die. And we should be able to approach that understanding with as little fear and as much curiosity as possible. Nobody should be discouraged or shot down from wanting to know a little bit more about a natural part of life. And I do worry that the fear-mongering approach that this documentary takes would discourage people from wanting to know more about death, or from planning for their death. There's also another side to all this that should be taken into consideration as well, which is how much did the victims and the families of the victims consent to having their deaths graphically exploited for this movie? Like, as much as I can defend a certain level of morbid curiosity, that curiosity should never get to a point where we're taking advantage of already vulnerable people. And how much more vulnerable can a person be than dead? The movie also takes this really weird left turn at the end and starts to say that ghosts exist. Okay, I might believe in ghosts. I have my reasons, but I'm not even gonna get into it right now because what does this have to do with the rest of the movie? The rest of it focuses on the natural act of death. The actual transitional stage from being a living body to being a corpse. If this was a full documentary on the afterlife, then cool, we could maybe explore multiple perspectives. We could maybe get some people on who have had some near-death experiences, we could talk about heaven and hell and reincarnation and spiritualism and all sorts of different stuff. Or maybe this could just be a full documentary on ghosts, I don't know. It's just that the way that the movie plays out now, it just kind of feels like you're gonna die, 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 and then you become a ghost. Bye! Traces of Death. No, no, honey, no. Yes, you're very cute. Come here. Can you sit on my lap, baby? Yeah, I don't see this working out very well. He's already wagging his tail. Oh, bye. Basically, you can think of Traces of Death as an attempt to revisit Faces of Death in 1993. Except this time, the fear-mongering is amped up with a hard rock soundtrack and fast-paced edits. And none of the footage is staged this time. Yep, all 100% genuine death here, including some actual murder footage and actual footage of an autopsy being performed, which to me is just the epitome of what's wrong with these movies. I have absolutely no problem with autopsy footage being shown in a documentary, but it's all about presentation. Like, imagine this. You're a young kid, maybe a little over your head here, but you're coming to grips with your own mortality. And you want to know a little bit more about what'll happen to you after you die. Now imagine this kid on the internet just sort of clicking around, trying to learn a little bit more about death, and he stumbles across some actual autopsy footage. Now there's two ways that we can choose to present this. clinically, perhaps with the presence of a medical professional who's calmly going over everything that they're doing. Or we can just show him a dead body and scream at him without any context whatsoever. Which do you think is going to be the more beneficial experience? Mondo Kane. Well, this one's just inherently problematic. So to understand this Mondo film, imagine that you traveled all around the world and filmed everything that you saw. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And then you came home and just edited together a bunch of clips without any context whatsoever. All of it with the express purpose of making Western audiences uncomfortable. Like, if you can't already tell, the entire premise of the movie is extremely racist. Let's just take one snippet from the beginning of the movie as an example. It plays out this whole skit where a celebrity is sitting in a department store waiting to get measured for his shirt, and then all of a sudden, bam, all these girls run out, they crowd around him, they demand his autograph, they rip off his shirt. It's kind of weird, but it's played off as super cute. Like, it's basically that whole scene from Hercules where the teenage girls run out and assault him. But then this movie chooses to follow it up with the most what the fuck thing I've ever seen. So we cut to New Guinea, where a tribe of native women appear to be chasing a man into the water. And the narrator assures us that they aren't only looking for autographs.
She wants the dick!
Which is just really awful because it does speak to this tradition of over-sexualizing women of color. Their sexuality is represented as aggressive and frightening, while the sexuality of the white women is represented as cute and innocent. Despite the fact that they physically appear to be doing similar things that are completely culturally divorced from each other, we just don't know what's going on in the clip from New Guinea, because the only context that we're being given is a bias context. We're told that the American women are crowding around a celebrity, but for all we know, the man in the clip from New Guinea could have any relation to these women. Maybe this is just a group of friends who decided to go running in the water for fun. Their smiles seem joyous enough. But to be fair, I just don't know, because the only context that I'm given is one that works off just the worst stereotypes imaginable. I did want to break down that one scene just to give you guys an idea of this movie, but there's also a lot of other gross stuff throughout the movie. I mean, obviously, the animal deaths are the worst, but we also have the documentary deciding to be just incredibly homophobic about a rite of passage performed by soldiers in Nepal, where they dress themselves in drag, essentially, and perform together. And honestly, that part of the documentary is extremely disappointing to me, because there was so much that Western audiences could have taken out of seeing that. This is just so outside of our Western concept of gender, you know? Like, we really could have used this as an opportunity to realize that we don't have the only opinions out there and that other cultures may be valid as well, but nope. Instead, we just take this as an opportunity to mock difference. Great. I'm also gonna mention the animal deaths again, just because I feel like I glossed over that. Yeah, animal deaths. Junk films. This movie is directed by Surosaki Kiyotaka, a photographer who became famous for taking pictures of death. So you can probably guess what this one is. It's another movie in the same vein of Traces of Death, with plenty of clips of people actually dying, including automobile accidents and corpses stacked in landfills. There's also some combat footage included, which you could sort of argue might enter into a slightly different space, sometimes anyway, than just being sought out for the sake of morbid curiosity. I think the intention of showing combat footage can sometimes be to, you know, force people to fully grasp the realities of war so that they don't trivialize it. But at the same time, I feel like the main purpose behind this movie is just to show people death in the most fear-mongering way possible, and you guys already know how I feel about that. Africa Addio. Africa Addio, along with Mondo Kane really, is one of the most influential Mondo films. It was released in 1966, and it includes real footage of violence in Africa after the end of colonial rule, including the civil war in Congo and revolutions in Angola and Zanzibar. The directors of the film were actually accused of staging footage, including the execution of a Congolese Simba rebel, and that one actually got them arrested for murder charges. But they managed to submit further footage that proved that they arrived on the scene just before the man was murdered. So they didn't stage it, and they claim that everything in the movie is 100% real. But they've also been accused of taking a racist rhetoric to the entire movie, with the thesis statement of the whole thing basically summing up to, wow, all of these atrocities wouldn't be happening right now if white people were still in control of Africa, completely ignoring the fact that all of this is happening because of colonialism colonialism to begin with. It does bring up an interesting question around documentaries in general, though. Especially when we're covering a topic as political as this, it's important to approach it as unbiased as possible, to avoid misconstruing facts or otherwise misleading the audience. But that is nearly impossible to do. Everyone comes to filmmaking with your own background and your own preconceived biases that are going to affect the way that the footage comes out. There's always going to be some sort of element of storytelling to the framing of a shot, or the specific clips that you chose to make the final cut. And this makes the very recording of the truth as it exists nearly impossible. For what it's worth, the filmmakers themselves denied any accusations of racism, and they claimed that they were merely outraged by the troubled political climate that they witnessed. And I can respect that they were trying to gain awareness towards a legitimate problem, but at the same time, I think that they should probably understand that most Western audiences have a very limited understanding of Africa. And you really are not helping the perception of the country when you make an entire documentary that only highlights the worst parts of it, followed immediately by the claim that white people need to save it. Yeah, just not a good look. Buried in the Sand. Oh, speaking of documentaries with a bias. So I'm just gonna read out the description of this movie from IMDb. Conservative political commentator Mark Taylor presents uncensored archival footage of graphic Iraqi and Middle East atrocities in an effort to justify American intervention. Moving on. Orozco the Embalmer. Out of all of the death-themed documentaries, this one is probably my favorite. Still problematic. It just sort of follows this embalmer working out of Colombia, in an area with an extremely high crime and poverty rate. It's a very quiet movie, just sort of following him as he goes about his work. And I know that I asked for a more clinical description of what was being done to the bodies, and I still think that that would help reduce some of the fear experienced around death. There is something a little bit artful and serene about the silence. That being said, just because I appreciate it doesn't necessarily mean that I enjoy watching it. This is like autopsy ASMR, which honestly is less relaxing than it sounds. It should also be mentioned that filming in this area does feel extremely exploitative. Like, I guess that you can make the argument that the documentary is just revealing the kind of conditions that these people live in, but at the same time, we're seeing people lying dead right on the street and then stripped naked on camera. And I don't really know how much consent they gave before they died. I doubt it was very much. Like, they show this one woman who's completely bloodied and beaten, and just from the state that she's in, I really doubt that she was able to pause from what was happening to her to sign a release form. And I understand that you can't consent to being embalmed a lot of the time, but at the same time, you do sort of trust that the embalmer isn't looking at you sexually. I really don't know if I can extend that same level of trust to every single person who has sought out this documentary in its 20 years of life. Death File Red. The closest thing that this one can be compared to is Mondo, as this is also a collection of just random clips of weird things happening. A lot of it is just plain exploitative. Oh, I forgot that I watched this one. Oh, I watched 5! Oh my god, my brain blocked this one out entirely. Like, they just show starving Ethiopian children for no other reason than to exploit their circumstance, I guess. And then they cut to a pair of newborn conjoined twins, and who I presume to be the star of the whole movie, considering they made the cover. A Harlequin baby. I'll let you Google images if you want. It's a baby, so it's adorable. It's a sweetheart. There's also some autopsy footage, and I have to admit, I am shocked by the amount of autopsy footage I have had to watch for research here. It should probably also be mentioned that the only version of this movie that I was able to find didn't have English subtitles, so I'm definitely missing some context from this next scene here. They interview a blind man for a while before bringing out a naked woman for him to grope on camera. It's so awkward too, neither of them seem like they want to be here. There's also a lot of military footage and some deaths that I'm not entirely clear on the context of due to the language barrier. From sight, I would guess that they're either riots or executions. Honestly, Mondo was hard enough to follow in English. Banned from television. This one is actually pretty self-explanatory. It's a collection of footage that was deemed inappropriate to be shown on television. So you get a lot of police footage and some bullfighting, and there's an escaped elephant and, you know, things like that. black metal veins. I honestly did consider removing this movie from the tier on the simple basis that its director, Lucifer Valentine, does not make me happy. If you want to know a little bit more about what I'm talking about, go watch part 2 of this video. But ultimately I did decide to talk about it, and before moving on, we are going to be discussing drug addiction for the next little bit. If that is something that you are struggling with, just know that you are valid and you deserve to be both loved and healthy. This is a documentary of sorts, although many of the scenes are staged. What is real is that the film follows a black metal band that uses heroin pretty heavily. And as much as it pains me to in any way compliment a Lucifer Valentine film, I will admit that there is something powerful about giving these voices a platform. They speak a lot about the abuse that they've suffered in the past, but also about the people and the opportunities that they've ended up losing along the way as a result of drug use, often leaving them in a place where they feel like their only source of happiness is the drug. They also discuss the difficulties they've faced accessing healthcare in their attempts to stop using. It should be mentioned that the documentary does not at all glamorize their lifestyle, and the way that these individuals can speak is oftentimes nasty. But regardless, it's clear that a lot of those feelings comes from genuine anger, and this documentary does give them an opportunity to be even slightly humanized. But you didn't think I'd give Lucifer Valentine too much credit, did you? No, there's still a lot of those fast cut edits that he thinks makes the movie artsy, but really it's just distracting. And the movie ends with one of the women apparently overdosing, despite Lucifer Valentine revealing on the DVD commentary that she didn't actually, and that the whole thing was just staged for shock value. Like, do I even have to mention how disgusting it is to ask a heroin addict to act out an overdose for your shitty movie that probably shouldn't be exploiting the lives of vulnerable people anyway? So yeah, as much as the brief moments where these people are given an opportunity to speak candidly are a shining light in this movie, Lucifer Valentine still had to ruin it with that edgelord thing he does so well. Hi, kitty. The dark side of adult films. So I'm apparently going to reveal something very weird about me and say that this is the sort of thing that I just watch on my own, you know? On a Friday night with my partner and some pizza. I did not expect to see something like that this far in the iceberg, but here we are. So this is actually a television documentary produced by Channel 4 Films in the UK, all about, well, the dark side of adult films. They just sort of go around interviewing people about their negative experience in the adult film industry. And there are some episodes that highlight things like bestiality and snuff films. Okay, apparently I am weird. But the whole thing is hosted by my second favorite doctor, Christopher Eccleston. My first obviously being David Tennant.
These human beings, consider their potential. From the day they arrive on the planet and blinking step into the sun, there is more to see than can ever be seen. More to do than... No, hold on. Sorry, that's the Lion King. But...
And also, the people that they choose to interview are just like Eli Roth? What the hell does Eli Roth know about the adult film industry? Did you guys even try? Like, yeah, obviously the whole thing is fear-mongering. I'd even go so far as to say that the whole thing is an attack on the adult film industry. Because literally the entire premise is that they are highlighting the voices that had a negative experience in porn and completely ignoring the people who had either a positive or a neutral experience. Archivio's Demort saga. This is yet another collection of death footage. All of it caught by journalists and amateur videographers. Again, it's entirely exploitative and fear-mongering. There also seem to be a lot more children here and like some murders, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm having a hard time finding information on this one, but yeah, there's something about this one that makes me feel really icky. And there you guys have it for part 3 of the Disturbing Movies Iceberg. I'm pretty sure we only have one more video left here unless I get really carried away with research, which is always a possibility. But I have a lot of exciting ideas coming either way, so make sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any of them. Or, you know, don't, because as we learned here today, critical thinking is an asset, and I really don't want you guys to just blindly do something because I told you to. Like, what sort of hypocrite would I be then? Well, in that case, I simply hope that you enjoyed my content enough to want to join me next time. Until then, my friends. If you were to go down to the description box, you would find the Amazon link to my book, Poor Pretty Creature, available wherever you can find ebooks. And well, I'm still here. Although it is completely unnecessary to donate, I do understand that a lot of people are struggling struggling financially right now, I did just want to mention that I have a Patreon which will be linked below, as well as give thanks to the people who already support me there. Andre K, Scott Falks, Thrill House, and Wilson L. Ricks III. Donations can be as little as $1 a month, but as I said, absolutely no pressure whatsoever. Your support means the world to me, but so does the support of every single person who gives a like or a comment or even just a view. I can't wait to see you all next time.